All right, let's dive in. We're tackling music releases this time. Singles, EPs, albums, the whole shebang.
Seems like you're trying to figure out how they all fit together.
Exactly. Like, why would an artist choose one over the other? When's the right time for each? We've got tons of research, articles, even listener notes on this.
It's smart to be curious about this stuff, because it's not just about the length of the music.
Right. So mission one,
Yeah.
figure out what each format is, why it matters, and how artists use them strategically. Let's start with the basics. Our sources seem to agree on the definitions, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like a single,
Yeah.
everyone knows that's one track, usually 2 to 4 minutes long, quick hit of sound.
Okay, the first taste. It's got to be catchy, memorable. But what about when an artist wants to give us more than just a taste?
Then you've got the EP, stands for extended play, right? 3 to 6 tracks, something like 15 to 30 minutes total. Lets the artist explore a theme, introduce themselves a little more.
So it's like a sampler platter, a few carefully chosen tracks to show their range. And then, of course, there's the album.
That's when they go all in. 7 tracks, 20 tracks, even more sometimes. 30 minutes of music, 80 minutes. It's a whole statement, a full experience.
Like stepping into the artist's world. Each song adds another layer. And then there's the mixtape, which almost seems like its own category entirely.
Always been a bit of a wild card, right? Like their own little laboratory to experiment, try out new sounds, do some collabs, maybe even release stuff that's not officially cleared,
So it's that direct connection, raw and unfiltered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our sources all agree that knowing when to release what is, crucial. What are some things an artist would consider when choosing a format?
We'll take the single. Really effective if you want to test out a new sound. Say, an artist is known for one genre but wants to branch out. Single lets them dip their toes in without the commitment of a whole album.
Right, like a low-stakes experiment. See how the audience reacts, and then you can adjust course if you need to. Someone like Halsey, who blends pop, alternative, electronic. Single's perfect for testing the waters there.
Exactly. And think about how singles build hype before a big release. Drop a few leading up to the album, keeps your name out there, gets people excited.
Super important in the age of streaming. New music is always competing for attention. It's like a slow burn strategy.
Exactly. Gotta maintain that connection. And don't forget the timing tied to, events or trends. Right song at the right moment can blow up.
It's like Lizzo's About Damn Time when things are opening back up. Perfect timing.
Okay, let's talk EPs. Our sources say they're great for newer artists. Why is that?
Well, with an EP, they can put out a solid body of work to show what they can do, without having to make a full album, which can be daunting.
So it's like saying, here's a glimpse of my talent, I'm ready.
It's less of a commitment financially and creatively, more freedom to experiment,
Yeah.
Good way to learn and grow.
And I bet a successful EP can get the attention of, industry people. Could lead to a record deal, even.
For sure. But even for established artists, EPs can be strategic. Explore a specific theme, new sound, but without going too far from what their fans expect. Like a side quest in a video game. It doesn't disrupt the main story.
And keeps fans engaged between albums, gives them something new.
Speaking of which, let's talk about albums. Our sources seem to agree that it's the ultimate statement, the culmination of everything.
True, an artist puts out an album and it's like, this is me, this is my story. It's a big commitment, and usually a big moment in their career.
And our sources really stress that the release strategy for an album has to be good. It's not just about the music itself, but the whole rollout.
You got to build that anticipation, the hype, In today's world, it's all about marketing, promotion, fan engagement, get the music heard.
One source, Tech Tycoon, they mention how important data is, especially for African musicians. They highlighted companies like URPR who help artists use data for targeted promotion on platforms like Unorthodox Reviews and the 49th Street.
And that's a great example of how data can level the playing field, especially for independent artists. You got to be smart, use all the tools you have.
So we've done singles, EPs, albums, but we can't forget the mixtape.
Mixtapes are interesting, really reflect how the music industry has changed. They have their own story to tell. Yeah, mixtapes are cool because they're super DIY.
Right. They've got that rawness, that authenticity that you don't always get with a super polished release.
And that rawness comes from their history. Think way back to the cassette days. Mixtapes were literally just homemade compilations dubbed onto cassettes. DJs showing off their skills, friends sharing music.
Artists getting their music out there without a label.
Exactly. The original disruptors, they bypassed the whole system.
A breeding ground for innovation.
Totally. And as tech changed, so did mixtapes. CDs came along, the internet, suddenly they're easier to make and share, way wider audience. And now with streaming, forget it, they're everywhere.
But, like, what's the advantage of putting out a mixtape today? Our sources talked about how good they are for building hype, especially for newer artists.
Yeah, with a mixtape, you can just drop new music whenever you want. No pressure of a big album release. Keeps your name out there, you know?
Test out new sounds. Give your fans something special. That direct connection, building your own fan base from the ground up.
Exactly. And because they're often rougher around the edges than albums, it gives fans a peek into your process.
Like we're seeing the artist in their element, trying things out. Think about someone like Chance the Rapper. Built a huge following off his mixtapes way before he had a record deal.
Great example. But there are downsides too, of course. Some artists worry that a mixtape could, like, overshadow their album.
Especially if it's got some of their best stuff on there, right?
Yeah.
You set the bar high, and then the album can't reach it.
And there's the quality thing. Mixtapes aren't always as polished. The mixing and mastering might not be as professional.
Part of the appeal for some people, but others might be used to that super clean album sound.
It's a balancing act. But for a lot of artists, the good outweighs the bad. It's that connection with fans, that freedom to experiment, building your own path.
It's almost like mixtapes have become their own genre now, with their own rules and aesthetic.
That's a good point. As the music industry keeps changing, I think mixtapes are going to become even more important, both for new artists and big names.
So we've done the history, the pros and cons, how they're used strategically. What does this all mean for the listener?
If you understand these different formats, it makes you a better listener, I think. You can, like, decode what the artist is doing.
Yeah, it's like you know the rules of the game. You understand why they chose a single instead of an EP or whatever, so you appreciate it more.
Imagine an artist who's always made, like, indie music. Suddenly they drop a bunch of pop singles. If you don't get how singles work, you might think they're selling out.
But if you know that singles can be part of a bigger strategy, then those pop songs make sense.
Yeah.
It's a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. You see the bigger picture. It makes you more engaged, more informed. You're not just listening, you're participating.
So when we come back, we're going to look ahead. What's the future of music releases? How's technology going to shake things up? What about new listening habits?
So much to talk about. Stay tuned.
Back again. So we've spent this whole time in the world of music releases, singles, EPs, albums, even mixtapes.
And we've seen how they're not just ways to put out music, they're like tools for artists to build their careers.
We talked about the strategy, but what about the listener? How does all this affect how we experience music?
Well, when you know the why behind an artist's choices, you can really appreciate their music more, like a behind-the-scenes look.
Totally. Say an artist drops a mixtape out of nowhere, full of weird experimental stuff. If you don't get what mixtapes are about, it's confusing.
But if you understand, you see it as like this chance to play around, try new things, connect with fans differently.
It's its own thing, not necessarily a hint at what the next album will sound like.
Right. It's like, a chef's fancy tasting menu versus their late-night experiments in the kitchen. Both good, just different.
I like that. And when you understand this for all the formats, you start to see the artist's whole journey.
You see how they evolve, the choices they make at each step.
It's like watching a chess grandmaster. You get the strategy, and then you really appreciate the brilliance.
Okay, so looking ahead now, what about the future of these formats? Our sources mostly talked about what's happening now, but technology changes everything.
Yeah, even now people have shorter attention spans. They want things quick. Maybe singles and EPs will become even bigger.
Could be. And with TikTok, Instagram Reels, music is even more bite-sized. Gotta adapt to how people are listening.
What about like VR and AR? Could albums become like whole experiences more than just audio?
That's wild. Imagine an album that's a virtual world. Step right into it. Visuals, interactivity, it change everything.
And what about mixtapes? Will they still be this raw DIY thing, or will they get more, I don't know, commercial?
That's a good question. I think it's up to the artists. They decide how mixtapes fit into this whole changing world.
So much potential, so many possibilities.
Definitely. One last thought for you. Even with all this change, music is still about connecting with people.
Yeah.
Moving them, inspiring them. That never goes away.
And whether it's a single, an EP, a whole album, or a mixtape, there's so much music out there to discover.
So keep listening, keep exploring, and keep the music playing.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.